This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform where entrepreneurs can easily create and customize their own personal or professional website. More on Squarespace later in the video.
So hello and welcome to yet another episode of Geographics. I'm your interim host, Karl Smallwood. Yes, that is my real name. And today we'll be talking about the Maldives, the hidden dark side of a tropical paradise. And as always, this video is based on an article provided to us by our stable of handsome writers/researchers. This one, Ben Adelman, can be found below at the social media links alongside my own if they provided them for us. But let's get to it. So for decades, it has been portrayed as an ideal vacation destination, a pristine tropical island paradise in the Indian Ocean, the perfect place to get away from your everyday worries. For many, it was a once-in-a-lifetime trip of their dreams, advertising itself as the perfect place to celebrate a honeymoon for newly married European couples. But away from the highly polished veneer of the tourist grounds, the Maldives is a country with a, to put it lightly, troubled history. For years, ordinary citizens, or Maldivians as they're known, will see little of the benefits of the quite literal multi-billion-dollar industry that constitutes up to 70% of the country's GDP. The profits instead flowing to a small group of ultra-wealthy resort owners and foreign investors. It is a country of strange contradictions, proclaiming itself to be an ultra-orthodox and, to quote, 100% Muslim country, where other religions are banned and Sharia law is very strictly enforced, while making the most of its money, selling itself as a debaucherous playground for Western tourists, like plying them with liquor and pork products that would earn the average Maldivian citizen a literal prison sentence if caught with it. Human rights abuses include, but not limited to, torture, arbitrary arrest and detention, and enforced disappearances are just a few of the tools used by the oppressive Maldivian government to enforce its rule, carefully concealed from the tourists in the outside world they came from until very recently. In fact, it was not until the inception of the internet that citizens of the Maldives were able to interact with the rest of the global community, and the last remnants of the old regime were not swept away until just a few short years ago. Most people in the Western world would have trouble locating the Maldives on a map, and it's not hard to see why. It's so small it's barely visible on a map. The Maldivian archipelago is a chain of about 1,200 islands in the Indian Ocean, located about 750 kilometers to the southwest of India and Sri Lanka, its closest neighbors. The archipelago is primarily made up of a group of 20 coral atolls, stretching about 820 kilometers from north to south and 130 kilometers from east to west. None of these islands are very big. The entire landmass of the Maldives is only 300 square kilometers in total, making it the 9th smallest country in the world by total land area. Around 524,000 people call the Maldives home. Out of the 51 countries that make up the continent of Asia, only Brunei has a smaller population on the whole. If you smush together the islands that make up the Maldives and you put all of its population within them, you'd end up with a country that could comfortably fit within the boundaries of Fresno, California, the 34th largest city in the United States. Almost half of the population lives in the capital of Malé, which takes up the entirety of the island of the same name, as well as a spillover into several neighbouring islands. Over 250,000 people are crammed into an area of only 8.3 square kilometres. It is one of the most densely populated cities in the world, behind only ones like Kowloon and the like. There is evidence that the Maldives was occupied by people as early as 500 BC, though there may have been present up to 1,000 years before that without leaving any archaeological traces behind. The ancestors of modern Maldivians immigrated to the islands from India and were known as the Devis, which is still reflected today in the name of the Maldivian national language, Devahi. Early Maldivians were practitioners of an ancient form of Hinduism before becoming Buddhist in the 3rd century BC. King Koimala, who reigned in the 12th century AD, is credited with unifying all of the islands of the Maldives into a singular kingdom. He was the first to settle in the capital of Malé, where it has been ever since. His nephew, Dovemi, who succeeded him, converted to Islam in 1153 and forced the rest of his kingdoms to follow suit, giving himself the new name of Sultan Muhammad al-Adil. Trade was a highly important aspect of the Maldivian economy for many centuries because of its strategic location and abundance of natural resources. One resource in particular, cowrie shells. Cowrie sea snails have a shell that is not dissimilar to porcelain in both appearance and texture. Dating from ancient times until as late as the early 20th century, cowrie shells were used as a currency in China, India, and the African kingdoms. And one of the largest sources of cowrie shells in the entire world just so happened to be the Maldives. And it's said that the ancestors of modern Maldivians were able to literally go to the beach and pick money up off the beach. Oh, so hi, Business Karl here with my co-host, Business Anteater, to talk about today's sponsor, Squarespace. Tell me more about today's sponsor, Squarespace, as I make my Anteater rotate on the spot.
So Squarespace is an all-in-one website platform used to create a beautiful website.
Well, I think the key thing there is it's a website that makes websites. Like, that is the key, a website that makes websites. Because, yeah, that's such a weird, but that's what it is.
It's a pretty good system because it's suitable for like amateurs to professionals. So you could have, a video of you spinning an anteater.
That's the thing, yeah. You can the internet is full of a lot of weird things. And, the weirder, the better. The more specific, the better. And every person out there, do they say every person's got one great novel in them? I disagree with that. Everyone out there has got one viral video in them. So if you think it's a good idea, why not go out there and realize it for yourself? And the ways you can realize it are numerous, and Squarespace can help you in many ways, including the use of the Fluid Engine. And the Fluid Engine system allows you to do what, Nisha?
Drag and drop.
Which just makes things so much easier. Everything should be drag and drop.
You can also customize everything. So if you want to just now, like you just did there, make that Anteater blue.
And the customization is the operative word there. You can make it as simple or as complicated as you like. Make it an extension of your own personality, however weird and wonderful it may be.
Well, speaking of extension, Squarespace also allows you to add extensions to your website. So if you want to increase the functionality, what your website is able to do, you can add in these various extensions that allow you to do extra things on top of what Squarespace already lets you do.
You might be thinking, well, do I need a website? Well, do you have a social media account? You have a website, but that's a website that you can't really do anything with besides changing a profile picture. Like if you sell something, even if you make silly dumb jokes or videos or anything like that, it's good to have a place to act as a repository for them, right?
And if you enjoy using social media, you could also use Squarespace, not even for anything business-wise. You could just use it for a blog. You could post updates and stories and things about what's been going on with your life or what you're doing for work. And then you can also share those out or just categorize them. You can even schedule them if you're going to be away for a while.
Yeah, that's the thing. You can't schedule on social media very well. So, Joe, it should be as simple as, say it with me, Nisha, it should be as simple as...
Drag and drop.
So thank you to today's sponsor, Squarespace. Check out squarespace.com/geographics for 10% off on your first purchase of a website/domain using the code Geographics. And something we've been doing at the end of sponsor spots is sharing an extra bonus fact for the audience at home. So guys, would you like today's bonus fact? Yay! I like how you got more excited as these have gone on. So did you know that The Predator was originally going to be a CGI lobster ninja played by Jean-Claude Van Damme? When I say The Predator, I mean the 7 feet tall, dreadlocked engine of destruction featured in the Predator series of movies. Before it became that design, originally the idea was for The Predator to contrast with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jesse Ventura, Carl Weathers, these huge, large, refrigerator-shaped gentlemen by being lithe and ninja-like. And they thought, why not get in Jean-Claude Van Damme, the muscles from Brussels, to portray the Predator? And to realise the Predator's now iconic, invisibility effect, they made the suit bright red. That would be easy to key out against the jungle to realise the Predator's invisibility effect. The problem was that Jean-Claude Van Damme didn't really know too much about special effects at the time, so when they showed him this bright red suit which looked like a lobster, he genuinely thought that's what the Predator looked like and would not get into the suit. Because when they asked him to get into it, no, it looks stupid, I'm going to look stupid. And no matter how much they told Jean-Claude Van Damme, no, that's not what the monster looks like, we're going to use special effects to make it look invisible. He's like, no, I don't want to wear it, it's a weird lobster thing. In 1558, the Portuguese established a colony in the Maldives, administering it from Goa in the Indian mainland. They would be driven out by the Maldivians in 1573 after attempting to convert the populace to Christianity, an event celebrated annually in the Maldives as National Day. In the mid-17th century, it was the turn of the Dutch to claim the Maldives for their own. Unlike the Portuguese, however, they had a altogether more hands-off approach to internal affairs, leaving that to local leaders. Ruling from Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka, they didn't care to convert the islanders either. They were just more interested in controlling trade. The Dutch were replaced by the British, sorry about that one, who expelled the former from Ceylon in 1796. The Maldives' status as a British protectorate was officially confirmed in 1887, when the Sultan signed a treaty with the British governor in Ceylon. In exchange for an annual tribute, the British would provide military protection while staying out of domestic affairs, which was probably more a result of the British not wanting to involve themselves in the often confusing internal politics of such a small, out-of-the-way place than any sense of benevolence on their part. As a British person, that tracks. Unfortunately. The British stationed many ships and aircraft in the Maldives during World War II, using the islands as a refuelling stop for their way to battlefields of East Asia. They would re-establish an Air Force base, RAF GAM, in the mid-1950s after the loss of bases in the newly independent countries of Pakistan and Sri Lanka. These would close in 1976. Initial attempts to end the Sultanate and form a republic in the Maldives had not really gone well. The first president of the Maldives, Mohammed Amin Didi, was beaten so badly by an angry mob in 1953 that he died, and the Sultanate was restored the very next year. It would last until 1968, when the Republic of Maldives was declared, following the results of a national referendum. 3 years earlier, the Maldives had ended its protectorate status with the British, becoming an independent nation in its own right. Ibrahim Nazir, who had been the Prime Minister under the Sultan in 1957, became the new president. Nazir worked tirelessly to modernise what had been, up to that point, a fairly isolated country, building Malé International Airport on the island of Hule, and establishing modern educational curriculum that would see almost all young Maldivians learning English. And for anyone curious why that's the case, English is noted as the language of the skies. All airline pilots, for example, have to know English regardless of what country they are from. Again, sorry. The most important innovation, though, that happened during Nazir's time in office happened in 1972, when a group of Italian tourists were flown to the Maldives and spent a holiday on the newly built resort on a previously uninhabited island. The group was the first of many. Nazir was replaced as president by Mahmoud Abdul Gayoom, the former Minister of Transport. Gayoom had studied at the prestigious Al-Azhar University in Cairo, which made him one of the most educated people in the country at the time. And he took advantage of that fact to thoroughly dismantle democracy in the Maldives. And he would rule for 30 years, from 1978 to 2008, winning 6 elections that often featured him as the only name on the ballot. Gayoom controlled everything in the country, including the military, the press, the economy. The People's Parliament, the Majlis, was a farce. All members were hand-selected by Gayoom himself and mainly served as a rubber stamp to approve whatever the hell he damn well wanted. The judiciary was also stacked with Gayoom loyalists who were given instructions on how they were to rule practically every case by the president or one of his closest advisors. Anyone who opposed the regime or just displeased Gayoom in any way could expect a visit from his thugs known as the Star Force. Hundreds of people were arbitrarily arrested and detained during his reign, and many were tortured in order to force them to confess to whatever crime they were accused of. The methods of torture were as creative as they were often barbaric. Prisoners were beaten, force-fed crushed glass, drowned in the ocean, or, perhaps most creatively of all, left out in the sun with sugar water poured on their skin to be eaten alive by insects. All of this was happening out of sight of the rest of the world, by the way, as Western tourism became the single most important industry in the Maldives. More and more tourists, particularly from Europe, came in every single year, driven by extensive advertising campaigns that promised a carefree, pristine, tropical paradise. Tourists were taken directly by boat or seaplane from the airport to one of hundreds of private island resorts. Some of the more luxurious hotel suites were even built out on the water with clear floors so that you could see the brightly coloured tropical fish and the occasional snorkeler swimming right under your feet. This multi-billion-dollar industry ran like a well-oiled machine, headed up by a dictator, and almost none of the outlandish sums the tourists spent on their holidays and overpriced drinks ended up back in the hands of ordinary Maldivians. In order to get around these strict laws that prohibit the importations of contraband that was considered haram in the Islamic religion, like alcohol and pork, the islands that the resorts were located on were classified as uninhabited, even though they had as many as 600 people living and working there at any given time. It was very likely that most tourists would go their entire trip in the Maldives without ever meeting or spending time within the proximity of a single actual native Maldivian, since most of the resorts were staffed by foreign workers from Bangladesh, Nepal, Thailand and the Philippines. Almost all of the US dollars spent by tourists quickly disappeared into foreign bank accounts or paid as bribes to the Gayoom regime in order to keep things running nice and smoothly. Meanwhile, the few Maldivian workers that did end up working in such resorts were paid in Rufiya, a currency considered so suspect by the rest of the world you'll be pretty much unable to exchange it for foreign money outside of the Maldives, which, why would you do that when you can't leave? It was a system that benefited a few oligarchs at the very top of the social pyramid, and of course, President Gayoom himself, who embezzled hundreds of millions of dollars from the state coffers during his 3 decades in power. At the state's expense, he built himself a huge presidential palace in Malé, his own private island, and sailed around on a presidential yacht worth in excess of $10 million, all while the average Maldivian made less than $700 per year, forced to live in 6 to a room in squalid apartments in Malé in order just to pay the rent. The behind-the-scenes tyranny was exposed to public view in 2003 when a 19-year-old prisoner named Evan Nazim was beaten to death by his prison guards. The death of Nazim sparked an uprising at the prison, to which the guards responded by opening fire, killing 3 and wounding 17. The public, which was already angry at Nazim's death, rioted when the news of the shooting broke. The civil unrest spread all over the country, but was most heavily concentrated in the capital, where the government buildings and police stations were set on fire. Though Gayoom quickly cracked down on the civil unrest, the genie was out of the bottle, and for the first time, the Maldivian dictator came under major international pressure to make reforms that would make his country more democratic and grant the citizenry civil rights. An opposition group, aptly titled the Maldivian Democratic Party, or MDP, was formed, led by Mohamed Nasheed, a former political prisoner educated in the United Kingdom. Nasheed's MDP largely worked in exile in Sri Lanka and the UK to avoid arrest, lobbying international groups like the UN to put pressure on Gayoom's government. After years of protests, crackdowns, and increasing international pressure, including the threat of a tourist boycott, a new constitution was ratified in the Maldives in 2008, and then the first free elections for president were conducted in October that same year. Nasheed was able to beat Gayoom with 54% of the votes in the second round, surprising international observers who expect the dictator to cheat, but Gayoom wasn't through yet. So while Nasheed was president, he found himself confronting a fairly hostile government, which was controlled by Gayoom loyalists, and a judiciary that was supposed to be independent, yet all the judges' posts were kept by the same men who'd been appointed by the old regime and were still attempting to do his bidding. With this opposition, Nasheed struggled to institute any real reforms, including balancing an increasingly unstable budget. Things came to a head in 2012 when the police and military mutinied, forcing Nasheed to resign in what many described as a coup d'etat. The remnants of the old regime creep back into power with Gayoom's half-brother, Abdullah Yamin, elected in 2013. Many of the same autocratic practices that characterised his brother's reign made a return, including silencing critics of the regime through arrest, exile, sometimes outright murder. Attempts were made to ban other political parties from contesting elections, crackdowns were made on the press, and Nasheed was arrested and jailed vaguely on undefined terrorism charges. He fled to the UK to avoid being imprisoned. Things came to a head in the run-up to the 2018 presidential elections. Nasheed had been barred from running, as he was a convicted criminal, so the MDP picked Ibrahim Salih as their candidate to run against Yamin. Yamin was accused of a number of dirty tricks to rig the election in his favour, attempting to bar international observers from the country and raiding the offices of his rivals for obvious political reasons. But it didn't work, and Salih was elected in a landslide victory, securing 58% of the vote. Nasheed was rehabilitated and will be elected Speaker of the Majlis, while Yamin found himself convicted of money laundering and corruption charges in December 2022 and was sentenced to 11 years in prison. The remnants of Gayoom's political machine may have been swept from power, but the situation in the Maldives today is still highly volatile. Nasheed was seriously injured in an assassination attempt in 2021 when a bomb was detonated outside his home. The 2023 presidential elections, scheduled to be held just around the time this video has been recorded, promise still to be more drama. Far from the halls of power, Maldivian citizens still face a number of issues, including many human rights deficiencies. Flogging is still a prescribed punishment for extramarital sex, for example, among other crimes in Maldivian law, and it's disproportionately meted out to women compared to men, particularly women who become pregnant out of wedlock. Homosexuality is also a jailable offence, as is the possession of contraband, which includes liquor and pork. Interestingly, Maldivians have gotten around one part of these restrictions at least by having a rather, shall we say, lax view of what marriage vows actually constitute than other countries. The Maldives has one of the highest rates of divorce of any country in the world. Divorce is not seen as a social stigma, like premarital sex is, even for women, so it's not uncommon for people to get married and divorced multiple times when partnering up with someone new. Life, as they say, finds a way. The Maldives also advertises itself as a 100% Muslim country. It's literally written into the constitution that all Maldivian citizens must be practicing Sunni Muslims. All other religions, or the lack of belief in any religion, is illegal. Acting contrary to the tenets of Islam is one surefire way to tar your political opponent in order to discredit them. And religion has frequently been used as a weapon among the population. After all, no one wants to risk being labelled as an apostate and face alienation and violence at the hands of your peers. Of course, none of these laws are enforced on the resort islands, which are still today technically considered to be separate fiefdoms from the ones populated by Maldivian citizens. Resort owners are free to import hundreds of tons of alcohol into the resorts every single year, which is consumed by tourists in overpriced cocktails with those little umbrellas in them. Much of the alcohol intended for resort customers does end up on the black market in Malay though, where anyone can get a drink if they really want to. The key thing is just not to publicly admit it, and of course, make sure nobody finds the bottle. But perhaps the biggest threat facing the Maldives is not something it can fix with legislation. Climate change. In 2009, President Nasheed famously appeared in newspapers around the world when he held an underwater cabinet meeting, highlighting the effects that rising sea levels caused by global warming might have on his country in the future. And as ridiculous as that sounds, it's worth pointing out that the Maldives is the lowest lying country in the world, with none of its land being more than 2 meters above sea level. If the height of the ocean continues at its present rate, it's expected that the entire country will be submerged by 2100. More immediate effects of climate change include the bleaching of coral caused by rising water temperatures and increased rates of beach erosion, which could quite literally whittle the islands away to nothing before the water has a chance to submerge them. The Maldives showed just how vulnerable it was to the whims of Mother Nature in 2004, when it was part of the worst natural disaster in modern history. On December 26th, a massive earthquake caused a tsunami that swept across the Indian Ocean, sending huge waves all the way to the eastern coast of Africa. The Maldives was right in the firing line as a 5-meter tall wave, keep in mind the entire country is only 2 meters above sea level, inundated the entire country. Critical infrastructure was literally just washed away, and the water table was contaminated with salt water. Over a dozen islands needed to be evacuated, 108 people died. The tsunami did an estimated $400 million in damage to the Maldives, a figure representing some 60% of the entire country's GDP. And yet, it could have been much worse, because the Maldives does not sit on a continental shelf the way Sri Lanka, India or Indonesia does. There was no large landmass to compress the wave before it hits the island, which is what makes tsunami waves so large and destructive. Instead, the wave sort of just rolled over the entire country and just kept on going. Compared to Indonesia, which was hit by waves up to 30 meters tall and recorded 150,000 deaths, the Maldives relatively got off lightly. As you might expect, tourism continues to be the engine that drives the Maldives' entire economy, representing about 90% of government revenues charged annually in taxes and customs duties. And it doesn't appear that's likely to change anytime soon, as more and more tourists flock to the islands each and every year, even withstanding speed bumps like the COVID-19 pandemic. In recent years, the flood of European tourists has been surpassed by visitors from China, after a partnership agreement between the two countries to promote the Maldives as a safe holiday destination for Chinese tourists. The increased influence of the Chinese on both the Maldivian economy and the government have been a point of contention for many. One of the most divisive issues in the 2018 election, for example, was whether the Maldives should continue to pursue closer ties with China, which was favoured by Yamin, or to do so with the Maldives' traditional ally India, favoured by Salih. The struggle for regional influence between the two major Asian rivals is sure to feature the Maldives as a battleground in the coming years. Increased tax revenues on resorts and crackdowns on human trafficking, meanwhile, have finally opened the books on the Maldives' most lucrative trade to the rest of the country, allowing for a better quality of life for more and more Maldivians. The Maldives is a country of transition, a process that began decades ago and continues to this day. For a long time, the events of the rest of the world didn't really affect the Maldives, the product of an isolated location and a fairly insular culture. Now they're part of the global community though, and they have to face issues that affect all of us, like climate change and regional geopolitical tensions, all while trying to keep up with modern society and put their own house in order from decades of autocratic rule and corruption. Sure, this isn't perfect, but it could be worse. After all, Maldivians do live in a tropical paradise, even if it does have its dark side. You just have to do what the Maldives' own tourist slogan suggests. Keep it on the sunny side. So thank you for tuning into this episode of Geographics. As mentioned at the start of the video, I've been your interim host, Karl Smallwood. Yes, that is my real name, and this video is based on an original article by Ben Adelman. Find links to our socials below. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you have anything to say about it, leave a comment below. In particular, I would like feedback on my presentation and hosting style, because in the past couple of weeks I've been the interim host. I've been trying to refine it, just altogether fit with the established tone and voice of this channel as set up by my esteemed peer, Mr. Simon Whistler, while still keeping my own mannerisms and idiosyncrasies intact. If you enjoyed those, you can find more of them on my own channel, Fact Fiend, and Wiki Weekends, where I'm altogether more relaxed and we have a far more casual tone. we drink beer instead of coffee, for example. But otherwise, yeah, thank you for watching the video. Like, comment, subscribe. And as always, I'd like to wish everyone the day they deserve. Cheers, and have a great day.